Welcome to the Equality in Action Women Advancing Inclusive Infrastructure session today. I'm Carmen West, Vice President of the Equality of Opportunity Initiative, also known as EOI. I'll be participating in a fireside chat with Diana Mendez, Corporate President of Infrastructure and Mobility and Equity of HNTB. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act is a once-in-a-generation investment that will rebuild America's roads, bridges, and rail, expanding access to clean drinking water, ensuring that every American have access to high-speed internet, and much more. In celebration of Women's History Month, we will share how business leaders are helping to advance inclusion and modernize our country's infrastructure. Welcome, Diana.
Thank you so much, Carmen. It's an honor to be here with you today.
Great, excited to have you. Well, let's jump right in.
Sure.
You are HNTB's Corporate President of Infrastructure and Mobility Equity. Tell us about your role at HNTB and your experience in infrastructure.
Well, it's a very exciting time to be in infrastructure, and I'm very pleased to lead HNTB's commitment to infrastructure and mobility equity. As you mentioned, the bipartisan infrastructure law has opened up tremendous opportunities for how we think about community and how we implement infrastructure to support community aspirations. So a lot of credit to my position and what I'm able to do at HNTB goes to our CEO, Rob Slimp, whose vision and experience in working through Accelerator for America with mayors throughout the country to create vibrant, economically thriving communities really was the inspiration for how we think about our role differently as providers of infrastructure and how we expand our focus to think about the whole community. So we're not just looking at the facilities and the concrete and steel, but we're really thinking about what happens beyond the right-of-way and what it takes for our communities to uplift all who live in them, including those who have sometimes been left behind. So that's really my focus, is working with our teams. I do a lot of training and education to increase awareness that everyone has a role to play in how we can implement infrastructure improvements in a more inclusive manner.
That sounds so very exciting. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act is a once-in-a-lifetime investment. And I know we've kind of mentioned that several times because it's really, really, again, unprecedented time. It's more than just roads and bridges though, right? What does infrastructure include?
So you cannot say it enough that this is a once-in-a-lifetime generational opportunity for transformation in our country. And you're correct, it's not just about roads and bridges, but infrastructure is a big word and means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But when I think about infrastructure, I like to think about connectivity, right? And connecting people to each other, to opportunities, both work and education, and connecting people to the future for themselves and their families, and building the American dream. And so the bill itself, it has 1.2 trillion over 5 years, so huge amount of dollars. As far as roads and bridges and transit go, it's a 34% increase over prior levels. So substantial investments. So all of you who are complaining about congestion or the conditions of your commute, help is on the way. So 500 billion for roads and bridges and 90 billion for transit. So big numbers, so that everybody has better access and connectivity. But as you mentioned in your opening, drinking water and wastewater, there's 55 billion for that. Ports and inland waterways, another 17 billion. Airports, 25 billion to modernize terminals and improve how our air system is operating. And then energy, 73 billion to modernize the grid. And I would be remiss if I did not also mention the investment for resiliency measures, both in terms of cybersecurity as well as climate resiliency. And so there's another 50 billion in there for that. So a lot of work to be done, and work that will transform the future of communities across the country.
Wow, yeah, it's such a wide gamut that covers so many different areas. So thank you for that. Through your work, you intentionally changed the conversation around diversity and inclusion from a requirement to more of a competitive advantage, emphasizing on the linkages between diversity and innovation. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure. You know, a lot of our conversation, particularly in the infrastructure field around diversity and inclusion, is framed by requirements for participation by historically underutilized businesses. And I'm using the term historically underutilized businesses. I know many in the audience are probably more familiar with the term disadvantaged business enterprise, but you know, words matter. And you know, while the Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program has made great strides in enabling and increasing opportunities for women-owned businesses and minority-owned businesses, I think it's time to evolve our conversation away from compliance and whether or not we've achieved percentages to what are the unique contributions that can be made as a result of different points of view. There is a great body of research out there now that suggests that more diverse teams get better outcomes, they're more productive, they're more efficient, they get better solutions. And I'm not aware of research that says, you know, homogeneous teams are the way to go. So now that we have that information, let's take advantage of those perspectives. And in the infrastructure space, I think it's particularly important because the communities we serve are diverse. And so when the teams developing and implementing the infrastructure improvements have a shared lived experience with those in the communities that we are serving, we're going to get to better outcomes. And so that's where the competitive advantage comes in. Greater understanding, more comprehensive point of view, and ultimately better results for our customers.
Well said, well said. I attended a meeting on the Equity and Infrastructure Project, which you helped to lead. Can you tell us a little bit about what that project is and how it works?
Absolutely. So the Equity and Infrastructure Project was started by two incredibly inspirational leaders, Phil Washington, who's currently the CEO of Denver International Airport, and John Picari, who's the former Deputy Secretary of Transportation at USDOT, former Maryland Secretary of Transportation, and currently has a 3P business consulting venture that he is running. And John and Phil were leaders of the transition team, transportation and infrastructure segment for the Biden administration. And during that time, they thought a lot about what can we do differently in the infrastructure space in order to increase opportunities for historically underutilized businesses. And that led to a lot of conversations around a series of executive orders that have been passed to advance racial equity through the federal government, as well as a provision that was contained in the executive order passed on day one of the Biden administration, tackling the energy crisis at home and abroad. There's a provision called Justice 40, which talks about the need to have communities benefit, underutilized businesses and disadvantaged communities benefit from federal investment. And that 40% of the benefits that accrue from federal investment should accrue to those underserved communities. And so the Equity and Infrastructure Project focuses on one aspect. There are obviously many tools and many ways to make those changes, but the Equity and Infrastructure Project focuses on contracting and increasing the number of contracting opportunities for historically underutilized businesses, but also increasing the opportunity to be a prime consultant. And this goes back to the experience, if you talk to a lot of owners of historically underutilized businesses, most of their experience has been as a subconsultant. And as a subconsultant, you are not in control of your destiny. You get what you get when it's available on somebody else's schedule. And so how do we help those businesses become primes? And you don't just flip a switch, right? Because if your business is set up as a sub-consulting practice, there are things you need to do a little bit differently as a prime. And so the Equity and Infrastructure Project has two major components. One is the pledge that is being undertaken by public agencies across the country to increase the number of opportunities in contracting in their agencies for historically underutilized businesses. But also it's about what has to happen so that historically underutilized businesses are ready to be primes. And what sort of business assessments need to take place, what kinds of additional skills are required in order to take on those leadership roles. So very, very exciting initiative, and one that I believe is really going to make a difference in our future.
Agreed. I know that there was a number of organizations that took that pledge. How many organizations are in alignment with the pledge? How many have accepted and or pledged?
So, so far, there were 5 initial, what were called the first movers, and that involved transit agencies, a water authority, and then subsequent to that, state DOTs have begun to sign on. So if you take the first 5 movers along with the 6 state DOTs that pledged at the end of last year, and an additional 13 took the pledge just earlier this month.
Wow.
You know, we're gaining momentum, and this is a CEO level commitment. It's the leaders of these agencies that are stepping forward and saying, yes, we're going to look at how we do our procurements, we're going to look at how we bundle our contracts, and we're going to hold ourselves accountable. We're going to measure where we've been and where we want to go and take actions to do so.
That's impressive. That is, kudos to the individuals that are attempting to make this a movement, and to have that level of commitment is just very impressive, considering that you have the top level state agencies who are stepping up and saying, yes, this is something that we feel is important. And I'm super excited that you are leading this work along with your colleagues.
And I think what's very exciting about it is the more people are thinking about this, the broader conversation we have, and the more ideas start to flow. And then everyone's not having to figure it out on their own.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
You can build off of each other's experiences, adopt and tailor what has worked elsewhere to your own needs. It really creates a momentum and an energy and an excitement.
Indeed, indeed. Well, last year, the Chamber interviewed Alexis McSween. She's the founder and CEO of Bottom Line Construction and Development. She's a 100% woman and minority-owned company up in the New York area, where she works to cultivate inclusive and proud communities through high-quality structures, spaces, and infrastructure that her company builds. How would you describe the participation of women-owned businesses in the infrastructure sector?
So, women-owned businesses are increasing in number, and so we see them increasing in the infrastructure space. I mean, infrastructure has traditionally been a male-dominated profession, and infrastructure is a field that's a little slow to change, right? Yes. But we are seeing change. We are seeing, as women get different educational training and background, that's influencing the roles that they choose to play on infrastructure projects. So still very much a work in progress. Certainly there is a lot more to do in terms of both helping women-owned businesses have the confidence to diversify and take some risks and play bigger, as well as within the industry increasing awareness of what these firms can bring and contribute to the work.
In that, do you see other challenges that women-owned businesses face that may not be directly aligned with, the obvious, of course, but what are some of the other challenges that you think that women face?
So I believe that stereotypes take a while to dissipate, and so some people still believe that women may not be as committed to career and work as they are to family concerns, and that women have more obligations regarding child care and care of elderly parents. And so as a result, people might still be unwilling to invest in female professionals and invest in women-owned businesses because they're not sure that the work will be the top priority. And it's really interesting. There's a wonderful book by Michelle P. King, and she is the director of inclusion at Netflix. And the name of the book is called The Fix. And what she writes about is that traditionally there's been a lot of emphasis on trying to make women be able to be the same as men. And so when you look at different programs of executive coaching and whatnot, it's all sort of hearkening back to some of the traditionalist roles from the 1950s and the 1960s. And so her point in the book is women don't need to be fixed. They have their own way of doing business, and women leaders and women business owners have their own way of managing circumstances and setting priorities, and that we ought to let that play out because the research that's going on says, hey, the results are pretty good. So just sort of rethinking the role of women and understanding that women have a lot more opportunities today, and women are going to be just as committed to advancing and growing business and taking care of their employees and taking care of their customers as any business.
Yeah. I believe the statistics were that 42% of all businesses are women-owned, and that's about 13 million.
Right.
So, yeah, women-owned businesses are surely growing.
Right. But interestingly, with that statistic, women-owned businesses get a very, very small amount of investor funding. It's as low as 2%, I've heard. So there's a big gap to fill there.
Yeah, and that segues into my next question, because access to capital is the number one impediment for all businesses. And, how do we get more capital and funding to women-owned businesses in the infrastructure space? What are your thoughts?
Well, so one thought has to do with the Small Business Administration, which is a really important and expansive agency with a great reach, but it has not had a full reauthorization since 2000. So in 22 years, bits and pieces have been fixed along the way, but a full-blown reauthorization that would facilitate a discussion about micro-lending and how we might change what are some of the definitions around small business, what the enforceability is, what the organizational structure is of the Small Business Administration, how it relates to the other agencies. I mean, the SBA has quite a challenge, right? Because as the advocate for small business, yet the actual contracting is done by all the other separate federal agencies, right? So that reauthorization would provide an opportunity to sort of update. I read an interesting statistic that 68% of the businesses operating today didn't exist when the Small Business Administration was last authorized, right?
Wow.
So a lot has changed. And so at a policy level, if we were able to really modernize the Small Business Administration and taking into account the broad range of needs, because during that time, the number of women-owned businesses has increased dramatically as well. So I think some of the answers lie there.
What are some other program and resources that you're aware of that are available for women-owned businesses and infrastructure? And on top of that, what are some things that could also be available that you think that probably is not available but could be available?
So it's interesting because there are a number of great programs at the federal level, and there are also a number of privately led initiatives. But that information is not out there, right? Goldman Sachs, in their 10,000 Small Business Voices survey, they talked to about 900 women-owned businesses, and less than 38% were certified as women-owned businesses with the federal government. And the federal government has, the SBA has a goal of 5% of federal contracting going to women-owned businesses. And I think last year it was about 4.5% that actually occurred. So there's concern about the level of resources that it takes to become certified, maintain those certifications. And so as a result, a lot of businesses are not taking advantage of the opportunity. So some simplification around the certification process, which is hugely fragmented and a little bit different everywhere, just enough different that you can't use the same certification in different places, would, and investing in the technology to do that would open up not only a lot more opportunities for women-owned businesses, but to the agencies who are trying to implement this once-in-a-generation investment opportunity. I mean, they need help. They need more firms that can do the work. So I think it's good in terms of increasing women-owned businesses, but also in terms of actually being able to deliver on the promise of the bipartisan infrastructure law, because everyone needs all the help they can get. I'm sure you've had many discussions here at the Chamber about labor shortages and how difficult it is to find workers.
Yeah, that's a great segue into, corporations and organizations like the U.S. Chamber. What can we do more to inspire young women entrepreneurs and to help women-owned businesses grow and prosper?
So first of all is, we were just talking about federal and private programs. Having that information more readily available and not so difficult to find. Mm-hmm. I think also, encouraging women-owned businesses to, they are good enough. Women talk a lot about imposter syndrome and not ever
Mm-hmm.
feel. You are good enough to get, private grants, public grants. Have the courage to put yourself out there, and if it doesn't work, try something else. But I just think instilling that confidence, creating more awareness around the programs, simplifying processes, and really, and perhaps at the federal level, investing in sort of guides or, people who can demystify what sometimes seems to be a rather overwhelming, time-consuming process.
For several years, you've been an adjunct professor at Rutgers University, teaching the National Transit Institute's Advanced Environmental Justice Seminar. You're a regular speaker at conferences, including the Women's Transportation Seminar, the American Public Transportation Association, and the Conference of Minority Transportation Officials. You are really, really busy. What tips would you provide women in our audience who seek to have the right work-life balance, right? Because I think that, being an entrepreneur is quite tedious. Having been there myself, it's really hard to juggle it all. So what are some of your thoughts about creating work-life balance?
I think we're going to be talking about work-life balance for years and years to come, because I think people are realizing that what has traditionally been framed as a woman's issue is actually a people issue. And so a lot of the issues we talk about that would benefit women would equally benefit men in the workplace and people of any gender identity.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of hard work that you have to do with yourself, because you are the only person who knows what is right for you to live a whole, fulfilled life.
Yeah.
And that changes over time at different parts in your life.
Yeah.
Different things will be more or less important. And so knowing what you value and recognizing that you don't have to have everything all at once now.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Sort of play the long game. Look at the long horizon and think about when in life you might prioritize different things. But you have to do the work and have that conversation yourself. And I think it's hard because there are a lot of pressures about what you should be doing. And, nobody wants to make mistakes and fall behind. But at the same time, only you can answer that question.
Yeah.
And it's about, I don't like to think of it as a balance, because balance to me implies, sides leveling off against each other.
Yeah,
I like to think of it as a more sort of holistic, fulfilled life that you're comfortable with.
Absolutely, I agree. So, last question before we go to our audience. This is a personal question. What do you do for fun? You?
So, I am very grateful to all the people who invested in me along the way and who afforded me incredible opportunities. I mean, I always say my success has been a team sport, and I would be nowhere without those who gave me time and who shared their knowledge. And so a lot of the talking and the teaching that I do relates to that giving back, because it's my turn to share my experience. So I know it sounds like work, but for me it's really fun and fulfilling. But then on sort of the less work sounding side, for many years I had the privilege of working on the Washington Metro Rail system and doing a lot of the route extensions on the Green Line and the Orange Line and the Red Line, and then what ultimately became the Silver Line out to Dulles. And along the way, I learned quite a lot about wetlands and the importance of wetlands, and how to restore them and take care of them. Because as we had to mitigate different impacts on the metro system, we had to sometimes create some wetland communities. And so I now have a property in St. Mary City in southern Maryland.
Nice.
And on that property was a really degraded wetland. And so I go out there and by hand I research all the native seeds, I take out the invasive plants.
Nice.
And I've been restoring this wetland. My neighbors call me Swamp Thing because they come over and I'm head to toe in my boots, out there restoring the wetland. And it's been really magical because it was really very degraded and there was not a lot of biodiversity. And now we have nesting ducks and egrets, and we have osprey nest as well. There's a fox family. There's there are all these different animals that are living next to this wetland, and it makes for a very enjoyable way to spend my weekend afternoons.
Yeah, it sounds like it. It sounds like it. I may have to come and join you one day.
I need all the help I can get.
Great. Well, let's go to the audience and see if we have any questions. First question, which we might have answered, but I'll ask it. What are some of the resources that are available for minority-owned businesses to connect with organizations who are looking to increase their diversity spend?
So certainly working with associations such as the Conference of Minority Transportation Officials is a great sort of first place to go to understand the breadth of resources that are available. And then also some of the private grants and private foundations. The Ms. Foundation, the I Fund Women Foundation all have different programs targeting minority businesses as well as women-owned businesses.
Okay. The next question is, you mentioned CEO level commitment. How do we engage organizational leadership in these initiatives that we spoke about earlier today?
It's such an important and critical question, because the kinds of changes we are talking about they're cultural changes.
Yes.
And in order to affect those cultural changes successfully, you absolutely need to have the commitment of the CEO level or the C-suite, because it's through that it's possible to change standard operating procedures to be more inclusive. So, obviously making the business case, increasing awareness. Sometimes when I talk to people, I realize that they would like to contribute, and this is particularly true of white men. They would like to be advocates for change, but they're not sure where to start. So I would say the number one thing is to make it approachable and sort of a judgment-free zone, so that you can have honest conversations about what's working, where you fall short, in sort of a non-threatening, non-defensive context. And then, the business case. I mean, sometimes people are just not aware of the body of research that's out there. So awareness can make a huge difference.
Yeah, indeed. The next question is, it tackles a little bit on the access to capital piece, but it says prompt payment is a real issue for small businesses. What are larger organizations doing to address providing prompt payments?
I'm so glad whoever asked that question, thank you, because I had wanted to bring that up as part of our discussion on what are some of the barriers for small businesses and women-owned businesses. And, unfortunately, most contracts contain procedures that have paid when paid clauses, right? So if there's a delay in payment to the prime contractor and you're a subcontractor, So looking at ways that we can expedite, I mean, a lot of times the work that those subconsultants are doing is being performed, can be validated more quickly. And so is there a way to accelerate payments to small businesses for just that portion of the invoice, for example? Also, some companies are not including those paid when paid clauses. They're not passing that down to minority owned or women owned businesses and are just paying them within a certain amount of time of when they invoice. I think also working with small businesses to help. I mean, a lot of times small businesses don't have the extensive accounting staffs that a larger firm might have. And so you get hung up on the intricacies and complexities. So, if you're a prime consultant, take the time to do an invoicing workshop. Share your lessons learned of, what holds up payment, what accelerates payment, and help smaller businesses become expert at putting together good invoices that can be speedily processed, because that's a lot, that's more of the issue than it should be, but it's very, very real when you're strapped for time and expertise. And most important, that working capital, as you mentioned, paying your employees creates jobs, and, again, and from a subcontractor's perspective, I mean, it helps you get more subcontractors as well. Exactly.
Because if if they're not getting paid, then again, it adds to more of a workforce issue, which leads into the next question. The individual indicates, "Thank you so much for organizing such an informative event," which of course you're most welcome. How does HNTB encourage women workforce and infrastructure? Or what are some of what are your thoughts surrounding how to encourage more of a woman-driven workforce and infrastructure?
Great question, and it all starts with the pipeline, because if you're waiting to try and solve that problem with the employees who come through the door, it's too late. So go back in the educational process, go back to high schools and, college level STEM programs to encourage more young girls to become active in engineering, infrastructure, the fields that traditionally wind up in the infrastructure space. So we support a number of initiatives. We call them Spark initiatives. One of the larger ones is in Los Angeles, where we partner with different schools and help create a curriculum to encourage women or young girls to enter the infrastructure field. Because a lot of people don't even know that it's a possible career choice. I mean, I didn't know it. I fell into it because I, was interested in the environment, and transit was important for the environment, and that's how I wound up in transportation. And so I think we have to do a better job of making people aware of opportunities and the career that you can have in infrastructure. And again, to give a shout out to the Conference of Minority Transportation Officials, they have an internship program to introduce youth to infrastructure, and they offer firms like HNTB the opportunity to have interns over the summer, so that people can explore the career opportunities. So it's a really, really terrific program, and we love to partner with Compto on that.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, our last question says, thank you for your definition of infrastructure as connecting people. We would love to hear more on this. Help us understand more about how infrastructure connects people.
It's a terrific question, and it really goes to the next phase of infrastructure. We have this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity with the bill. We have the money in the bipartisan infrastructure law. We have the collective will to invest in underserved communities and create more inclusive opportunities for everybody. And the connections that we make are critical to all of our success. We learned that during the pandemic, right? Whether it's physical connections or whether it's connections using technology, it's the people outcomes of the infrastructure that really matters. And so, you know, we used to measure the success of infrastructure on the performance of the facility. And I think we now have a unique opportunity to be more inclusive in what we think of as outcomes for infrastructure, and focus on what are the people outcomes? What does it mean for the communities? What are the connections? So understanding the distribution of needs and where people need to go for educational opportunities, where people need to go to spend time with their families, where people need to go to work, and working with communities to co-create solutions to fill those gaps. Really is where we're headed in the infrastructure field, and it's a good evolution.
That is powerful. It always goes back to the people, right? Well, that has been great. I believe that's all of our questions. I want to thank you so much for giving us your experience. Your sentiments today have been nothing but a breath of fresh air. And in today's conversation, we covered a wide range of resources and opportunities related to infrastructure. So I'm hoping that the audience have really enjoyed this conversation as much as I have. For more information, please visit our website at uschamber.com. Thank you so much. Thank you, Diana.
Thank you so much, Carmen. Enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you.